Hello and welcome to the unboxing of Tales from the Loop, the very first Free League game I ever bought. It's been sitting on my shelf. I've never had a chance to play it. I probably never will. I look at it all the time. I love this game. I love everything about this game. The system is the system. It's Free League doing Free League. There's a lot of wasted game space, but everything else about this game just, from the very first moment I saw his art, it just washed over me like a river of nostalgia. It just sung to my childhood in the 80s heart of just that, as you know, as I refer to it sort of as the beautiful melancholy of the last summer of childhood. That's what Tales of the Loop is to me. It's everything I've wanted in a role-playing game that wasn't superheroes or D&D. It had dinosaurs. And it had kids going on adventures, and it had that nostalgic love for being a kid in the 80s, and then it also just had weirdness and supernaturalness and just scariness. So it was beautiful, it was charming, it was nostalgic, it was scary, it was wonderful. The art is just, for me, breathtaking. Now, I don't expect you to agree with me. I'm, whatever, but expect me to be very waxing poetic on this one, because I'm just such a fan of his art, and there is just a tragic beauty in this book, and having grown up in the 80s that he imagines here in California. Yeah, this was the 80s of our imagination. So obviously, if you're a fan of Free League like I am, and if you've watched any of the other videos I've made about Free League's books, this is a very expensive game. This is about 200 pages, and about 50 of those pages are completely unnecessary. So let's take a look. Let's unbox Tales from the Loop. There's also a Tales from the Loop TV show that was on Amazon that is loosely connected to the books. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like it's getting picked up for a second season. And then there's the Electric State movie that's coming out that has nothing to do with the books. There's also a very obscure, I think it's a French science fiction movie. I think it's called Vassin or Varicin. And that looks like Tales from the Loop. Like, I don't know if that was directly or indirectly inspired, but if you can find it, I think it's on Amazon. It's called Vassin or Varicin or something like that. And it's this weird robotic post-apocalypse. It is the Tales from the Loop movie. There was also those funny Tales from the Loop cyberpunk memes that came out, like the guy who was, had the farm on Mars. Remember those? Yeah. All right. So here we go. Starts with hey, how do you play this game? And right there we get the first, the kid in his bathing suit going into the watering hole. And there's just the ruins of these machines, and it's tragic that this technology is encroaching on his childhood, but it's also just like, wow, that's gorgeous. Yeah, here we go. This just looks like it's snow, it's bright lights, it's pretty, it's Christmassy, but it's also like, what's going on? So here's the world, and here's what the world is like, the typical, this is what the age of the loop looks like. This was like growing up for me in the 70s and 80s and early 90s in Sweden and Switzerland and Norway on these little islands, and I'm Steven, and this is what I did. So, yeah, and this is the childhood of his imagination. Well, of all our imagination, really. So world building, telling you about the world, what it was like to be a kid in this world, what it was like to live in these, small islands during the winter or summer, and just add to that the encroaching of the technology. Now, obviously, they did not grow up with a particle accelerator capable of piercing the time-space barrier, but there was a lot of tech going on, and a lot of the families worked at, these major tech corporations. So while he did not grow up with, robots and stuff, he did grow up seeing the environment of his, his islands and his worlds rapidly change from the 1950s, 1940s to 1980s, and suddenly there's these factories. So that's what he's trying to translate a lot, is just how quickly that encroaching technology changed his world. So this is all just talking about the technology, the advancements in the technology, what it's like, what it was like growing up in that world. I think that kid is peeing in the yeah. They're just you know imagine this being you just normal trucks you've just parked up but yeah, obviously we don't have robots, but we do have this this cross pollination of technology and childhood and the old world and the new. And this is talking about the loop here in the US, which is probably in Nevada, right? Let's face it, if we're going to have something weird in the US, it's going to be out in Area 51. Yep, Boulder City. Yep, Boulder City. That's in Nevada. So, yeah. It's also Boulder City in Utah, but we're just talking about it in America. And then the Boulder City one. So this is Boulder City. Yeah, it's Boulder City, Nevada, which I have been to. Look at that. That's just beautiful. So all this is just world building. We haven't got to characterization yet. We just spent 50 pages telling us about the world of the loop. And obviously, because it is so rich and so different and so both nostalgic and futuristic, both, comfortable and cozy and quaint and cute and horrifying, and just that dichotomy of the two. He has to, spend a lot of time describing the world. But of course, then there's all huge sections at the end of the book that also describe the exact same thing. So again, that's Free League justifying the $60 you spent for this. So here are the kids. We got the different ones. We got the bookworm. We got the computer geek. We got the hick. We got the jock. We got the popular kid. We got the rocker. We got the troublemaker. We got the weirdo. And again, I just look at these right now and I go, some of these are the exact same. If you're trying to make the Breakfast Club, which is obviously what you're trying to do with these kids, but then some of these are the exact same kid. The weirdo and the goth kid. How to make the character, the tables you row on, what is their relationship, what's their one thing, what's their hideout like, how is their relationship with their parents, with the world, with school, stuff like that. Then we get into the heart and soul of the game. Why don't the adults see these things? Why are the kids the only one that can pierce the barrier and see the weirdnesses going on? How come the Scooby Gang is always the people who can solve these mysteries and nobody else can? How come Buffy, how come the Goonies are the ones that can only see the stuff? How come the kids from E.T. are the ones that could only, time and time again, the thing about this genre, which they go into a lot to explain, is, somehow the parents and the adults are there, but they're not of any consequence, right? And they don't really have anything to do with the story until maybe either the beginning or the end, where you have the scene where the kids try and resolve it with the parents' help or the adults' help, the police help, and they're just shined on. And then you got, all right, guys, we're going to have to do this ourselves. Why is that? And that's explained both here and again here. So here's 2 chapters doing the exact same thing that could have been done with 1 chapter. So again, Free League, I love you, but you are guilty of wasting space. So this explains the mystery, the adventures, what the kids can do, how threatening the world is. I mean, there's dinosaurs in this world. I love this picture. We're coming up to the picture that made me fall in love with this. But, there's dinosaurs, there's robots, there's flying cars, there's super advanced technology. There's also just this prehistoric thing, plus there's soldiers, plus there's their ever-present, threat of winter and Russia and the Cold War. So how come the kids can do this and see this and respond to this when adults just kind of seem to be detached? Are they just too tired from work? Or is it they just can't? Somehow being a child allows you to pierce that barrier of the fantastic that adults can't. And that's one of the overriding methodology of running a Tales from the Loop game. Running any game with these kids is you have to understand part of the trope is the kids are the only ones who can pierce the veil of the impossible because they are still kids. And as a kid, you're still willing to suspend that disbelief that adults can't. It's like why Susan couldn't go back to Narnia, which if you're a fan of Susan and you're a fan of Narnia, Susan got screwed. But again, it's like, why can't I go back to Neverland? Why can't I go back to that summer? Why can't I see these things that I could see back then? And this explains the various phases of the mystery, right? So here's the game designers talking about, how do you run this? How do you run a world where, we have these fragile little kids going up against these daunting tasks? Why would they do it? How do they do it? How does the story play out? What are your things? What are the phases of that story? The beginning, the middle, the end, the hook, the line, the twist, the sinker, the showdown, the aftermath, right? So this is all how to run that story, how to run that Scooby-Doo adventure. And setting the mood. The setting the mood is just look at the art. Obviously, there's a lot of classic movies from the 80s about those kids, in that style of kids, that Monster of the Week, Goonies, It, Dandelion Wine. And it recommends all those movies. Here it is. This is the picture. This is the picture. My very first Tales from the Loop picture was the dinosaur chasing the ice cream truck. And this is what made me fall in love. I don't remember where I saw this picture the very first time, but I was just like, instantly, I want to live in this world. I want to live in the world with dinosaurs chasing an ice cream truck down a highway in the Pacific Northwest. Later, I found out it was a highway in, Norway, but I thought it was the Pacific Northwest. Here are some examples of the art and the robotics, and the world building. It's written like the graphic novel. It's written like a guide to the world, which is unique and fresh and different. And as I'm a huge fan of teaching about the game system through art, through story, through an NPC. How do I run a combat? Well, I could just do a boring cut and dry section on combat like every other role-playing game. Or I could do it through a story, through a comic, through something that's engaging, so you really have this visceral connection with the rules. And that's what they do with the art and things like this. So there you go. Then again, we have the mystery landscape, and you're like, wait, wasn't there already a section on the mystery? How is this section on the mystery landscape different than the section on the mystery? It just goes more into the world building, more into just this everyday sight and sound, things that adults take for granted. But as a kid, it's still meaningful, It still means something to you. You haven't become jaded. You haven't grown up yet, And then we get to basically example adventures. Here's another adventure section. This one's called The 4 Seasons of Mad Scientists. This is a sample adventure. This is another one called Summer Break and Killer Birds. So these are a whole bunch of sample adventures you could run, which is nice and heavily detailed, heavily art. And then here we get all into the section of why the adults can't or don't. Why you can't count on them as a resource, why you can't count on them pulling them out. And it does it, this is also a sample adventure, but in this sample adventure, as you see, it discusses again why the adults don't see these things. The adults don't respond to these things. Are they too tired? Are they too jaded? Are they too angry? Do they just not care? Are they in on it? Or is it something more, what's the word? Psychosensitive, psychological. Is it, when we grow up, we can't see the mystical overworld anymore. When we grow up, we can't go back to Narnia. When we grow up, we can't go back to Oz. When we grow up, we can't go back to Neverland. So we just don't see it. It's static. And here we talk about dinosaurs. So that just makes the game 100% better. You could just forget everything else I said and just appreciate the fact that this is a game of 1980s Earth where there are flying cars, but also dinosaurs. Dinosaur. So another sample adventure. Again, more examples of the art. Here's another one. Another sample adventure. A lot of good sample adventures describing the world, giving the characters things to do, the juxtaposition of childhood. And I mean, this is dangerous, right? So how do you justify placing, a 9-year-old in a world where he might get eaten by a dinosaur or killed by a robot or something? And then we have the credits. Credits. So you can see there is still some of the infamous Free League space wasting and Free League repetition. Are all these example adventures necessary? I don't know. I appreciate them. I think it's a great way to show you how the system works and how to confront each aspect of the system. And it gives you a clear follow through. This is probably one of their best ones. I mean, considering it was one of the first. It doesn't feel lazy. It doesn't feel padded. It's a system that's easier to play than you would think. The year zero system, like on the surface, is like, this makes no sense. I'm rolling too many d6. But then when you play it and when you build the characters like we did, you're like, oh, I get it now. And despite how badly laid out the character building section is, actually building a character is like 5 minutes. But yeah, so there's a lot of things that they did in this that they didn't repeat in their game design for a while. But as you look at Dragonbane, you can see that they're getting back to it. So yeah, there's still some wasted space, but not as much. And I don't mind the wasted space in this one because the art and the story, and that's the slow, methodical, wonderful swimming in a crystal pond of just tranquil terror that is the Tales from the Loop. And that's just, for me, it just gives me chills. His art just gives me chills. I don't know why. I am sure it's not for everybody. I'm sure a lot of people think Tales from the Loop is ridiculous and it wouldn't work as a game. Why would I want to play a kid? Where's the fun in that? Do I get superpowers? Do I get to shoot the robots? Oh, I'm role-playing the Goonies? There's example songs in here, example books, example movies, example TV shows. What the world building is amazing because it's his childhood, right? I mean, I've been mispronouncing his name. It's Simon's, this is Simon's childhood. So, of course, the world building is amazing. It's where he grew up. And it's that part of the world. It's his 80s. It's his going to school. It's his friends. These are all the stories he and his friends told when they were playing make-believe during that point of time, going through those, those hectic preteen, teenage years where the world was changing, your body's changing, technology is changing. Everything changed so fast for kids in the 80s, coming out of the 70s, coming out of the Cold War and going into the beginning of the, the digital age, and just, it's hard to put in words if you weren't there. It's hard to put in words. And if you were there and you did grow up in the 80s, you get it. And you get the nostalgia. You get the beauty of this book. You get the tranquil terror of this book. I'll end it the way I started it, the way I always say, when I wax poetic about the Tales from the Loop setting. There is a beautiful melancholy to the Tales of the Loop, that hazy, nostalgic view of that last childhood of summer. And for so many of us growing up in that time span, especially if you're a kid in the 80s like I was, and how the world changed in the 80s for so much. I mean, we're still feeling, echoes today of stuff that happened in the 80s and how it's, affecting us. Then, yeah, I mean, it is a very fence post statement. This was the last summer of my childhood. This was the last summer of Simon's childhood. This was the last summer of a lot of us. His childhood. We grew up in the 80s. We went from doe-eyed, optimistic kids to pessimistic, doom and gloom, grunge rock 90s kids, or young adults for me. So yeah, that's why I love it. And that's, like I said, I was going to wax poetic. So if that's something you don't appreciate, I completely understand. But there we go. We unboxed Tales from the Loop. My favorite Free League game. This is the game that made me fall in love with Free League. They have never disappointed me. Yeah, there's things about the game that but those are all just cosmetic complaints. So there you go. Thanks for sticking with me this Friday and this unboxing. We'll be back later. See ya.